Professor Santosh Mehrotra and his students worked in the last few years, I believe, working on different sources of data on Bihar, and he will have something to offer and tell us as to what needs to be done in Bihar, especially with reference to youth employment. We are very happy to welcome Professor Furqan Qamar Saab, Professor of Management Studies at Jamia Millia Islamia, Delhi. Speaker of, this afternoon, Professor Santosh Mehrotra. He was our colleague at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Both of us retired around the same time. He retired a little before. Uh, Dr. Himanshu is an economist working at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning. And Professor Rambabu Bhagat. He was formerly a student at JNU, but then he spent most of his life working at the International Institute of Population Studies, Mumbai. And everybody who has spared their time and responded to our request to join this afternoon. A few words about the organizers. There are three organizations that are involved in this program, in organization of this program. Institute of Indian Geographers is a 45-year-old institution located in Pune, but it's an all-India, it has an all-India presence dedicated to promoting geographical studies in India. Professor Ejazuddin Ahmad Memorial Fund was created by his students last year. And the very idea and the purpose was to, in fact, promote studies in the areas that Professor Ahmad worked. Professor Ahmad was associated with the Center for the Study of Regional Development, New Delhi. And he spent all his life working on various issues that affected the marginalized communities in regionally backward areas. He worked on the tribes and castes, women, and education. These were the major areas that he worked on, understanding from geographical perspective as to what the social structure and associated factors could have an impact on development. And he developed a substream in India, which is popularly known as social geography, very different from the Anglo-American model. And thirdly, and very importantly for this particular occasion, is the Patliputra Intelligentsia Forum, which was started about 2 years ago. Initiative was taken by one of our friends, Sri Anil Kumar Singh, whom we lost last year suddenly because of an ailment which was not attended to, or maybe it was due to medical negligence. It was his idea, as he had spent most of his life working with the voluntary sector, and he thought, people from Bihar and people who have something to contribute towards understanding the problems of Bihar development should come forward and start discussing the issues. But then, this is the first occasion that, the Patliputra Forum has associated with the program on Bihar. Hopefully, we'll continue to, in fact, organize similar discussions in future. Before I hand over the floor to Professor Jay Bhai, who is the General Secretary of the Institute of Indian Geographers. Thank you, Indian Institute of Indian Geographers, for helping us in various ways, because they have a much larger institutional setup. The other two organizations depend on the support that IIG has provided. For those who are attending, we would request that you keep your audio switched off, and you can put up your questions in the chat box. We'll be very happy to respond to each and every question, observation, and suggestions. But that will happen only after the presentation and after the discussants have made their points. So over to you, Professor Ravindra Jai Bhai, General Secretary, Institute of Indian Geographers.
So thank you, Sinha sir. So good afternoon to one and all. It's indeed a pleasure and honor to introduce those who are the today's speakers for this talk about the generating youth employment with structural change. Can Bihar break out of its low-income trap? As Sinha sir is told about the IIG, it was established in 1979. And right from the beginning, there were the various programs organized on this platform to promote strengthen the geography in the country. So first of all we have the journal Transaction. It has been publishing right from the 1978. And it is listed right from the beginning in the Scopus, and after that in a UGC care list subsequently. Again, we have the annual meets. And in addition to that, when Sachidanand Singh Sinha is become the president of the IIG, and recently he's re-elected the president of the IIG. It's a very rare occasion in the history of the IIG, mainly because he has initiated so many programs, and then realizing these initiatives and time required for that. So IIG Governing Council has taken the cognizance of his initiatives and decided to continue. And this is one of these initiatives. He had decided to have a number of talks on the different issues in different part of the country and at a national level also. So first of all, as my task is given to be introduced the very distinguished and great academicians of the country. So first, I will introduce the Farkan Kamar sir, who's a professor from the management at the Center of Management Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. He served as the Vice Chancellor at Rajasthan University and the Central University of Himachal Pradesh. He was also advisor at the Planning Commission of India on the education subject, and he was also Secretary General of Association of Indian Universities, which is also a very prestigious institute of the country. So this is very brief information about because if you look at their biodata, I think it will take complete half an hour to introduce all this, each one. So this is our chair. So I request Farkan Kamar, so please accept the chair and start the proceeding after introducing the other speakers. So today's major speaker is Santosh Mehrotra sir, who is a visiting professor of development economics at the Center for Development Studies, Bath University, UK. And he was a professor of economics at the Center for Labor and the Informal Sector at Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is also a professional senior fellow at Prime Minister's Memorial Museum and Library and research fellow at IZED Institute of Labor Economics, Bonn. He was head UNICEF Global Research Program at Innocenti Research Center, Florence, and chief economic at Global Human Development Report, New York, from the 1991 to the 2006. He was head of the Development Policy and Rural Development Division's Planning Commission. He was also Director General of the National Institute of Labor Economic Research during the period 2006 to. I also welcome you for this talk, who is our main speaker for the Professor Santosh Mehrotra. Then there are the two discussants on this topic. First is the Professor Himanshu. He is an associate professor in economics at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning, School of Social Sciences, JNU. He is also visiting fellow at the Center the Sciences, Humain, New Delhi. He has held visiting fellowship at the London School of Economy, British Academy Senior Visiting Fellow, and CR Parekh Fellow. UNU wider in Finland, and also this is the visiting fellow for these are the institute, and also GREQAM France. His primary area of research is development economics. there is another discussion, Professor Ram Bihar. He has been from the long time is associated with the IIG and is helping us in the various activities. Sir is an honorary professor presently at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune, and also a visiting professor at School of Development Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. So earlier, his long tenure, he served in the as a professor and head Department of Migration and Urban Studies, International Institute for Population Sciences, which is called IIPS in Mumbai. His research interests includes migration and urbanization, environment and sustainable development, demography, ethnicity, and politics. So these are the very brief introduction about the today's our chair, then our main speaker, and other discussants. So I think if you look at their huge biodata, I tried to give the brief information about looking into their outstanding. Now I hand over the sessions to our chair of this today's function, the Farkan Kamar sir. So sir, please start the proceedings.
Thank you very much, Ravindra Jai Bhai. And thank you very much, Professor Sachi Sinha Sahab. I think today is the day of Professor Santosh Mehrotra, and we have all gathered to listen to his talk, which is based on the work that he and his student has done on income scenario. In the gathering of people from economics, from geography, I think I am perhaps the odd man out, and the only reason that I am here is because of Professor Sachi Sinha. He asked me to join, and at that time, Sachiji, I didn't know you have switched off your video, so I didn't know he had this in mind. But thank you very much for this honor. Santosh Mehrotra ji has been engaging himself and has been informing all of us on this challenging problem of employment, unemployment, income, the data-related issues, the poverty-related issues, the challenges that are before. And he has been persistent on the issue of employment, unemployment in our country. I think we are all very eagerly waiting to listen to him. I have many things that I do not understand about the employment, and I'm very sure that after listening to Professor Mehrotra today, we would all be able to develop clarity. For example, we have been known of certain types of data which were used to comment on the income and employment and unemployment situation across the country. And lately, we started seeing a new kind of data emerging, that was the membership of the provident funds. What are those implications of those data? The other thing that I don't understand, because I work in the area of education, and quite often the income and education, there's a natural relationship that we always find. We are now told that unemployment rate in general could be in the range of around 6.5 to 6.8 to 7%. But how come that the graduate unemployment rate are so high that almost a third of the graduates in the country are unemployed? Does it have an implication? And the context that you have chosen, the two contexts, one is the context of Bihar, and you have highlighted this in your title itself, that you are concerned about the low income trap in which Bihar is. And you have also indicated on 2040, when you are thinking that our population or demographic dividend is going to wane, and perhaps India would start entering into where the population would start. If not aging, at least the young population would either stabilize. And I think in this context, we are all very keen to listen to Professor Mehrotra. At this stage, I'll stop here rather than standing between you and the speaker of the day, and maybe later on I would say something or rather ask some questions that I don't understand. So over to you, Santosh Mehrotra ji. You have already been introduced, though you didn't need any introduction. Most of the people present here, they know you so well. And I think the way they know you, I think it has heightened their expectation from your lecture. And I'm very sure that they will all be very pleased and happy to listen to you. Over to you, Santosh Mehrotra ji.
Thank you very much, Furkan Bhai. Very kind of you. And thank you very much, Professor Sinha, for bringing me into the fold of geographers. And I look forward to learning from all of you. Thank you particularly to introducing me to the work of Professor Ajaz Ahmad, the social geographer. So this is an appropriate audience. In fact, I'm delighted. And thanks above all to Professor Jai Bhai for giving me the opportunity. I want to begin by recognizing my students who worked tirelessly, in fact, over the course of this past year. We worked not for many years, unlike what Professor Sinha suggested. Actually, we worked essentially from the early part of last year, quite intermittently. And all my students who worked with me on this are actually Bihari students, so I learned a lot from them. I'm myself a UP Wala, born and grew up in Lucknow. But you'll see why my interest in Bihar has been heightened in recent years. But let me name my students: Rakesh Ranjan, doctors, all of them doctors. Baikunt Rai, Sangeeta Kumari, and Achal Gupta, who happens to be in Canada. And Furkan Bhai, wonderful that you are chairing it, because you and I were, of course, colleagues 15 years ago in the Planning Commission. You were heading the Higher Education Division, and I was heading the Rural Development Division. So wonderful to be in very, very good company. I think I want to start with my PowerPoint, and I'm just wanting to share my screen. Let me just see if I think you've given me the right to share, and here is my PPT. I hope you can see it. I'm going to take my screen as far away as right. And I also want to reduce the size of this. Okay, right. So you can see that's the title of my presentation. Let me see if I can take this to, oh dear. The slideshow. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So let me start straight away. That's the title, as you've already been introduced: Generating Youth Employment. Can Bihar break out of its low-income trap? I begin with the, just give me a second. I want to hide this, this bit showing on the top, because it's actually hiding the part of my screen. Maybe I'll have to escape the screen share. Give me a second. I think I'm going to pause share for a minute, and then I'll come back, because I don't want to. Right. We'll keep it to, okay. Right. So, oh, it's gone back to, yeah, I want to throw. Right. So, what we are talking about in this presentation is the relationship between human development and economic growth. And I've argued 2 years ago in a published paper in EPW which is called "Human Development Should Precede Economic Growth." Because the broad argument I'm making here is that there is a broad literature out there about a two-way relationship between economic growth on the one hand and human development. And because in our view, human development is both an input into and an outcome of the development process. And there is a conceptual model we use in our work where we essentially argue that a synergy exists between income poverty reduction, human capabilities, and economic growth. And essentially the argument we make is that economic growth can only be sustained if it at least accompanies improvements in human development and income poverty reduction. So the fastest way to reduce poverty is actually non-farm job creation, which is sort of in some ways partly based on the East Asian miracle economies. So essentially what the conclusion we would draw is that Bihar state must have an integrated and consistent economic and social policy that promotes all three goals simultaneously. Let me quickly move on beyond this sort of conceptual basis to lay out what the outline of the report, 175 pages of it, which we are now converting into a book for Penguin probably, how it is structured. So we begin by discussing in the first chapter how to sustain growth of per capita income. And in some ways, we argue, in accordance with the previous slide, the argument in the previous slide, that this state has to learn to reduce population growth. To begin with, let's just remind ourselves that the country as a whole, all the states of the country have achieved a total fertility rate of 2, which is below the stabilization rate. And believe it or not, the only 2 states in the country, according to the IIPS and the NFHS 5 latest, the only 2 states which still have a TFR of over 2 are UP 2.5 and Bihar 3. I know there are 3 small northeastern states, but we can sort of pass over them for the moment. But Bihar at 3 seems to suggest that Bihar will achieve at current rates of improvement of TFR and population growth rate only by the mid-30s at best. So what do we need to do to actually reduce population growth?
Professor Malhotra, we can't see your presentation.
Are?
Yeah, because we can't see your presentation. So maybe you can.
Wait a second. Screen share. Why did the screen share did not work? Forgive me, I don't understand.
Yeah, it's we can see, but it's not full screen, so you can.
No, I want to avoid full screen, sir.
Okay.
Deliberately avoiding full screen because that's blacking out my headlines.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Good. Thank you for pointing that out, sir.
Yeah.
So we focus in chapter 2 on how to generate jobs in the government. Next, we focus on how to generate non-farm jobs in the private sector, particularly manufacturing sector growth within a modified industrial policy. And then we look at how to generate non-farm jobs for women, particularly in government and the private sector. And finally, we look at how to improve worker quality through quality schools, higher education, vocational education, training. Let me move on quickly so what is Bihar's sort of structure of output is concerned? We all know it to be an agrarian state, and you can see this in the first panel here. Most recent data, the primary sector, meaning agriculture, total accounts for 20% of GSDP, which compared to the national average of about 15, you can already make out it's an agrarian state. But what's much more important from a worker point of view, which is what the focus of this presentation is of course the share of the workforce. In India, the share of the workforce in agriculture is shot up to 45%, But you can see the latest PLFS is suggesting that it's close to 49%. We'll come back to this subject in very shortly, because this is absolutely goes to the heart of the matter. Moving on, you can see something very interesting happening here in the bottom part of this slide, where we are looking at what has happened to the number of workers. These numbers are in millions. So look at agriculture. At least between 2012 and 2017-18, the share of agriculture, or the absolute number of workers in agriculture, was falling. In other words, 6 million, that's a dramatic drop. That means millions of workers were leaving agriculture for non-farm work, partly in Bihar and partly, of course, in the rest of the country. But notice what is happening since 2017-18. You are seeing a systematic increase from this number of 12.5, systematic increase over these years, all the way to 19 million. Nearly 7 million increase in agriculture takes place. And we'll have something to say now. Obviously, your mind will go back to the reverse migration that took place in the last 3 years. I want to flag the following fact here. It would shock all of you to know that over the 3 years, you see, from 2004 to 14, the absolute number of workers in agriculture began to fall. Never in the history of India until 2004 had the absolute number of workers in agriculture fallen until 2004. Since 2004, the absolute numbers begin to fall. And that continues all the way till 2019. And that's because sort of non-farm jobs were growing across the country and to some extent in Bihar too. But what you are seeing here is what has also happened in India. In other words, reverse migration into agriculture. And in India, 60 million workers have been added to agriculture. That's why the share of agriculture in total employment in India has skyrocketed from 42% to 46%. The absolute numbers have grown from 200 million to 260 million in the country. And this is also reflected here. Here at the same time, you're seeing some increase in manufacturing employment in Bihar. Yeah, this is just Bihar. But you can see then it sort of falls off and then hasn't still in 22-23 recovered to the level achieved by 2017-18. But the job growth is all happening in construction. And where we are talking about non-farm. And the job growth is also happening here in services. We'll come back to these issues shortly. Because there you can see some potential for structural change. And you're obviously seeing some potential for structural change generally here through construction and services, but not in manufacturing, not in mining. And agriculture has seen actually a reversal. So in some ways, I think my first argument, if we want to raise incomes in Bihar, is that if nearly half of the workforce is in agriculture, then we've got to raise incomes in agriculture. Now, there are many things that can be done, and this is already, a very policy-oriented document. And, we've already here begun to refer to things that can be done. So, for instance, agriculture doesn't receive a lot of loans, but it does receive microfinance loans. And 60% of all microfinance loans are actually going in Bihar into agriculture. And these can be extended by banks using Kisan credit cards and, agri-term loans. And these could enhance incomes, we estimate, for nearly 1 crore, which is 10 million small and marginal farmers. Similarly, agricultural diversification and local value addition can lead to new livelihoods in 5 years. For nearly 20 to 30 lakh farmers and agriculture. Because Bihar needs to diversify beyond paddy and wheat into sugarcane and maize in the north and central zones and oilseeds and pulses in the drier south. And jute is promising in the Seemanchal districts. Of course, Gujarat, we could learn from vegetable cultivation, we could learn from Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. Horticulture, There can be primary value addition. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because agriculture by no means is aspirational. Young people in Bihar are getting better and better educated. But the point I'm making is that if we do not improve the productivity in agriculture, we're not going to see increases in incomes in agriculture, which would generate demand for non-farm goods. And a broader strategy needs to be focused on Jal Jangal Zameen, which includes, flood management. We speak about specific things there. I won't go into it in the interest of time. And of course, in addition to, so we will need to regenerate natural capital. That's what I mean, Jal Jangal Zameen. Of course, we'll have to build on human capital, a subject which I turn to very shortly. But in the short run, we say that rural action by the government is required to raise farm incomes because there's been a catastrophic reverse migration to agriculture in 2020, 21, 22. And this has reversed some of the structural change, limited as though it was. Therefore, it needs to be reversed again. And action here means, we still are not seeing the kind of percentage in Manrega that could be generated. Bihar has never been a great performer on the Manrega. And it's particularly important for women. A very significant share of women do not migrate with the men. And 50% of the workers in Manrega who are women. So Manrega is improving, although the demand for Manrega has risen post-COVID. Unfortunately, it's nowhere close to what you would expect given the scale of the reverse migration. And we argue that, Manrega work can actually regenerate agriculture in this Jal Jangal Zameen approach to raise productivity. Let me quickly move on to sort of what has happened to growth rates. And you can see, by and large, you've got India, the blue is India growth rates, Bihar growth rates at 11, 12 prices. This is from about 12 to 22. Not much difference between the India and international growth rate. But I think the more important and the most interesting graphic is this one. Look at the left bar. Here, we are trying to see, is per capita income in Bihar converging with India? Well, clearly the data seems to suggest no. If in 1960-61, Bihar's per capita income as a percentage of India's per capita income was 70. In other words, it wasn't that far away. But of course, Bihar and the entire Zamindari belt had been severely exploited during the British. And this, please remember, 60 is barely 10 years after planned development begins. And obviously, Bihar is beginning with a handicap, yet it's still 70%. But notice in 70 it drops, in 80 it drops to 59. And by 93, 94, it's now 39%. And by the time this Nitish Babu's government comes to power in 2005, Bihar's per capita income is 33%. Between then and now, this is 21-22 data, Bihar's per capita income is still 33% of Please remember, for purposes of contrast, that UP's per capita income is 50% of the national. On top of this, of course, you have very significant disparity in per capita income by districts. This is what it is. This is trying to show the lowest per capita incomes at 21 prices are these red ones, and the highest are these relatively green ones. Patna is here for your interest. But this becomes much sharper when you look at this slide. In 21, per capita district GDP was 1,15,000 in Patna, which is pretty close to the per capita national GDP. But next, look what happens. Next, highest was Begusarai and Munger where it's 45,000 and 42,000, respectively, which is less than half of Patna. That's the degree of spatial inequality that we are looking at. So the only real town or city in the state of Bihar, entire state of Bihar, whose urbanization rate at Bihar's own government's estimate is 10%, which in 2011 census it was 31% for India, and we're talking about 21 for Bihar. So you can see Bihar's per capita domestic product in 21 has been just 31,000, which is that 33% I was telling you about, because the national one is about 110,000. So, and the average of Bihar is a third of Patna's. And Shiohar, another district, had the lowest per capita income of just 18,000. That's the scale of spatial inequality we are talking about. And on top of this, of course, the caste survey has already shown up dramatic, differences in levels of income. I will just highlight the middle bullet here. Backward classes are 61% of poor households in Bihar. They are 63% of the Bihar's population. On the other hand, forward caste, though just 15% of households, are 40% of the highest income category. And the highest income category is just over rupees 50,000 per month. So it's not exactly a very rich class that, as you can make out from the per capita income. Moving on, I think these are better shown by these, but I will, in the interest of time, move on actually. We've estimated caste categories and regions, and we've got sort of Bhumihar, Brahmins, etc. by district, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. I think what you have come away with from the last few minutes that I've been speaking about incomes is that, other than the fact that, we've got to invest in agriculture, and a lot of it has to do with public investment, above all, it boils down to bringing that TFR of 3 down, and as quickly as possible. So, because low incomes are due essentially to high population. How are we going to address this population growth? Clearly, through health inputs. Now, what are the health inputs that we need to work on? And unfortunately, everything looks quite horrendous here. If the India NFHS latest data for women between the ages of 20 and 24 who are married before the age of 18, you want to look at, it's only 23% in India, but it's 41% in Bihar. And this is despite the growing levels of education for Bihari women. Serious worry. Women whose BMI is below normal, about 19% in India, but nearly 26% in Bihar. So clearly, it's not surprising that if girls are getting married, 2 out of 5 girls are getting married before the age of 18, that the rate of malnutrition is going to be high. And that's exactly what you're seeing in these numbers. Stunting, India's average is 35, barely down from NFHS 4 of 38, but Bihar is 43. So clearly, unless we get the inputs into place in the health system, which unfortunately the state government has not been doing, as I will show you very shortly, we're not going to get there. I'm taking you back to my earlier argument. Invest in human development. That's the experience of the southern states. You invest in human development, you get sustained GDP growth rates. I mean, we demonstrate in that paper earlier I talked about where we look at human development outcomes over a period of 30 years from post-economic reforms all the way to 2019. And we look at growth rates, and we sort of are able to demonstrate econometrically that in the southern states, it's the early investment in human development which sustains the growth rate over 7% over a 30-year period. You cannot say that about Bihar. What about, health I've spoken about. What about education? Well, look at the situation here. This is the ASAR report of December 22. And what is the percentage enrolled that is actually attending school? And this is UP Bihar. only 50 to 60% of children who are all enrolled, they're actually attending school. If the children are not attending school, then how do you expect them to learn? If you don't expect them to, if they don't learn, they may get the certificate, they may come out of the school and still be in the informal sector or be construction workers. By contrast, 86 to 90% of children were attending school in these states, in the southern states. Inevitably, if children are not learning in school, they go to private tuition. Look at how high it is in Bihar. This is the percentage of children taking some form of paid classes outside of school. It happens to be 60 to 75% in the Bihar region, as well as Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. So, I mean, even UP is better. So clearly, there are very serious issues around the health and education needs. Let me very quickly move on. What is it that we find, therefore, in respect of government jobs? This is what I was leading up to. Look at the situation in respect of government jobs, vacancy, and shortage. Now, please understand that education, health, and the police, these three sectors account for 85% of all state government employees. This applies by and large across the country. 85% comes from the schools, from the education sector, from the health sector, and from the police. Now, just look at the absolute numbers of vacant posts. In other words, for decades, school teachers have not been appointed. I know that you will tell me that, oh, in the last year that, Tejasvi has been in power, they've been appointing. But look at this. This is simply vacant posts against sanctioned posts. And this is only for government schools. If you include aided schools, the number jumps from 2.2 lakhs vacant posts to 7.4 lakhs. And if you use some sort of metric according to which you compare, these numbers are very, very serious. Because obviously for decades, appointments were not being made in higher education, which is what all of us should be concerned about. Look at this number, 21,000 vacant posts. This is an absolute shocker, because what has happened, obviously, is private schools, private universities, private colleges have expanded across the country, including Bihar. But teachers not appointed. This is the situation. Of course, if it includes the non-teaching staff. But nevertheless, let's look at healthcare. Till March 2021, 58,000. This is the scale of the vacant posts against sanctioned posts. We're not even comparing it to IPHS standards, which we look at in the report. In police at the start of 2023, and by the way, some appointments have been made, some recruitment has begun in the case. It's close to 75,000. But if you look at a global norm, if you look by a global norm, the shortage of police is 2.75. So if your health system and your schools are not functioning, then how are you building human capital? Why do you expect FDI to come in there? And we'll show you some information about that. And if the police is so short-staffed, and most of the police that are in fact in position are serving bureaucrats or ministers, then you can imagine what's happening here. How do you expect governance to improve? If you don't expect governance to improve, then Mafia Raj continues. I mean, we may think that, Mafia Raj is gone, but we'll come back to that if you wish and if you're interested. Let me go on. I've already spoken about this. It's so depressing that I don't want to sort of... So what am I saying here? To start with, you want to improve outcomes in human development? Get the people in place. If you don't have the people in place, don't expect that you'll get the outcomes that you're looking for. Economic outcomes is what I'm saying. Moving on. I've already been talking about this, so I won't spend any more time on this. Moving on. Because please remember, these are only 5% of the total workforce, government jobs. But what you need to appreciate is how critical is the role of the state in having these people in place. If they're not in place, you can't expect to actually have the policy capability or the human capability to actually attract the jobs. Let me move on to government jobs recruitment process. Two actions we speak about and we discuss them in the report. What are the recommendations for curbing the menace of paper leaks? Well, Rajasthan has come up with this, penal provisions for paper leaks. But I would have imagined that in this country where we are patting ourselves on the back all the time, every day, particularly in the national media, about our digital infrastructure, to prevent paper leaks, why not online exams, which are centrally controlled and not decentralized exams, which is the way they are done, currently in every state government. So papers get leaked, and the children who are preparing are so frustrated and angry and then on the streets, which is what has led to this an organization called Yuva Halla Bol growing up in Bihar. It's not the only. It's actually spread all across North India, because this is a pandemic of paper leaking. I mean, I know many of us have very serious questions about the CUET within, the central exam, central method being used, to centralized method being used to get university students. But this should be clearly one way forward. We also talk about the government's actually accepting a model exam code, whose aim would be that there should be, every department should put out a time-bound and fair recruitment process, and it should be time-bound. In other words, every year, so many, this is the month in which it will be announced, this is the month in which we'll be taking the exam, and so on. But, who's thinking about this? No one, of course. But let me move on much more importantly to this. I have a total of 35 slides, but I'm now already at 24. So just very briefly, you can see, if we're spending little, because we just don't have the people in health and education, what's the per capita expenditure on health and education? This is by state, and look where Bihar is. What's surprising about that? It's 2,000 rupees per annum, as opposed to, Himachal, which is among the best states, it's a relatively larger state, 8,000. Per capita expenditure on medical and public health across states, this is the latest data that's available. Look where Bihar is. The highest is 3,000. We're at 1,000 here. Okay, more importantly, jobs in the private sector, which are 95% of all jobs. Clearly, what we need are the following four priorities, I believe, within a broader industrial policy. Till 2016, believe it or not, this state didn't even have an industrial policy. I've been making a case for a horizontal industrial policy for India. Well, India has not had a broad horizontal industrial policy since our economic reforms began. That's why we don't have much of an industry. But then Bihar, of all states, is in desperate need of some degree of structural change. You can't rely simply on construction jobs or on services, low order services. So clearly, we need to think about the organized sector. We then need to think about the unorganized sector. We need to think about how to promote the growth of more establishments as opposed to own account enterprises. And I'll dwell on each one of these in a minute on one slide each. And finally, we need to think about promoting industrial clusters to encourage the growth of more units in existing clusters in traditional sectors in Bihar's industrial policy, rather than what this current Bihar government is thinking about, promoting or inducing the development of new clusters. The administrative capacity within the government is so limited that to think about promoting or inducing the development of new clusters is barking up the wrong tree. It's the same policy being adopted in UP, and unfortunately, Bihar is following suit. Let me quickly move on. Let's look at the organized sector. What the organized sector, believe it or not, my friends, has seen in Bihar is deindustrialization. At least in India, you can say, oh, the contribution of manufacturing to GDP was 17% in 1992. For the next 25 years, it was till 2014-15, it was still 17%. So in other words, manufacturing was growing, but it was growing only at the rate that GDP was growing. In Bihar, you've had deindustrialization in the organized sector. So the only growth that you're seeing in industry, so-called broadly defined, is not in manufacturing, but in construction-led growth of employment, which in a sense I was speaking about early on in this. Now, in an agrarian economy, you would think that the agro-based industry factories would be actually doing well, growing. Well, are they? There's been a government in power for the last 17 years out of the 20 years, and Mr. Nitish Kumar has been chief minister of this entire 20 years. But agro-based factories in Bihar, just 1.3% of India's agro-based factories. And the share is stagnant between 13 and 14. And total number of organized factories, ASI data shows, has actually fallen. Fallen means people are leaving. That doesn't happen in other parts of the country. People are actually leaving what units existed. Non-agro factories, low share in India's total output, 1.7% in 13-14. It's now 1.5%. Share of Bihar's value of output to India's fell from 1.1% to 0.85%. And the tragedy, as I will show you in a second, is that labor-intensive industries, which one would expect to see in Bihar, and which in India generally account for 50% of India's manufacturing, which is textiles, garments, furniture, wood, food processing, leather and footwear, they do also predominate in Bihar. But I'll just show you what's happening in these sectors. I'm going to turn to the next slide. It's shocking. I've highlighted the sectors. Food products. This is employment in the organized sector. Please understand. And how there's been a collapse since 14-15 in the labor-intensive sector. This is total employment. It's gone in food products from 32,000 to 28,000. In beverages, it has halved from about 3,800 to 1,600. Textiles, you would expect textiles to be growing. No. It's actually gone down to 1/6. Wearing apparel, flat and constant. This is the tragedy of Bihar, of practical deindustrialization, even in labor-intensive sector. And these are sectors in which there are clusters, and I will come to the whole cluster issue in a second. Because all late industrializing countries in the world, and Bihar is certainly one of them, India is of course one of them, but Bihar within India is very late in industrializing, as I don't have to prove any longer, have adopted cluster development, geographic clusters, natural organic clusters which have developed as a way forward for growth in industry. Now, this is the fact that the vast majority of non-farm workers are in the unorganized sector and MSMEs. This is where, other than in agriculture, you're experiencing a low-income poverty trap. It's not just the fact that the vast majority are trapped in agriculture and that share is increasing, but look at the structure of the unorganized sector. Because you see, in the unorganized enterprises, which are essentially defined by and large in the data, NSS data, other types of data, as enterprises which employ less than 10 workers. They could be either own account enterprises which have no regular hired workers, or they could be what are called establishments, employing at least one hired worker on a fairly regular basis. Okay. Now, in Bihar, own account enterprises are 88% of total unincorporated enterprise. 88. मतलब एक अकेला बंदा कुछ कर रहा है अकेले. A need for promoting establishments is what we have to look at. Policy, which in other words, if we could focus policy on those units which employ at least 2 to 9 workers, if we got a a battery of policies, which I'll speak about in a second, then we could see, an increase in the number of establishments and the growth of establishments, because these will generate employment. Because we all know that they have higher productivity. If they have higher productivity than OAEs, in other words, they have higher productivity, they'll generate more incomes. If they generate more incomes, they'll reinvest, they'll grow, they'll generate more employment. Well, so 60% of all workers in establishments in Bihar, this is another dimension, are non-hired. In other words, they are unpaid family labor, both in rural and urban. And 30% of these enterprises operate from inside the household. So you can see that we are talking about a genuine, even in the non-farm sector, a low-income poverty trap. Average, gross value added per enterprise in India is 1.82 lakhs. Bihar is just 1.4 lakhs. So what have we been seeing? That if emoluments of hired workers are low, then clearly, and it's the service sectors which have tended to employ people, given that, manufacturing is a very small proportion of the unincorporated enterprises. What we are seeing, therefore, is that service sector, so manufacturing is lagging, and therefore out-migration into unorganized services enterprises from Bihar is actually quite visible, and they're the people who you find across the country. So what's cluster development? What have I been talking about? This is the way forward of late industrializers. What's a CDP? The Ministry of Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises has what is called a CDP. It's a well-recognized strategy to develop SMEs into, scale manufacturing. And believe it or not, Bihar has 34 clusters in handloom, 18 clusters in toy and wooden products, 13 textile clusters, 11 embroidery clusters. You see, so the state is full of them. There are 112 such clusters. And there are 9 food product clusters. And in my view, the industrial policy of 2016 and revised in 2022 needs to focus on, Bihar government has this, should cater to the development of these clusters. But clusters are mentioned very casually in this document. They think that they will be able to attract organized industry. Well, if they were being able to attract organized industry, they would have been getting it. They wouldn't have actually seen deindustrialization. Of course, you can imagine, Patna has the largest number of clusters, but there are a whole series of other districts which I also have it. Let me just say a few words about what kind of design we need to follow for CDP if you're going to get policy right. Every cluster, which consists of a large number of unorganized small units, the government should be providing in an integrated way 4 types of services. What are they? Of course, credit, help towards technology upgradation, skills development at the cluster level. There's precious little skills development going on currently. And then market development. All should occur together simultaneously in the same cluster. And what's needed, in other words, is policy coherence. That would involve the district industry clusters as well as the industry associations which exist in each one of these clusters. And of course, the GOB will have to facilitate. Let me quickly move on in the interest of time. You can just get a sense from these slides how many clusters there are in these various products. That's a very large number of clusters across the kind of product areas that we're talking about. And these clusters are not doing well. Otherwise, you wouldn't have seen the kind of analysis data that we were talking about. Clusters by districts. These are the districts where you have so many clusters by each district. Of course, Patna is the highest, but Madhubani, Gaya, Muzaffarpur, Swain, etc. Significant numbers. Let me quickly move on in the interest of time. So what we need is a new focus on clusters. Of course, we didn't even have an industrial policy prior to 2016. And what we are seeing recently, unfortunately, is that whatever mentioned clusters receive in the Bihar industrial investment policy of 16 and 22 is that they want to induce new clusters. Are Baba, you can't even revive the ones which exist. They seem to be dying, but that's not what you're focusing on. Let me, as I close now, and I am sort of attempting to close, just highlight one thing that would shock you about India generally and Bihar in particular. India is among the lowest female labor force participation rates in the world, comparable to what you find in Saudi Arabia and Yemen. In India, Bihar is at the bottom of the league table. Bihar female labor force participation is around 11% in rural and urban areas. So these are the rates that you are seeing between 93 and 22. These are depressing to say the least. And this is depressing particularly, of course, because girls are all getting better educated. Let's just remind ourselves that it was Nitish Babu who actually started that scheme of bicycles for girls who transitioned into class 9 from class 8. The whole country, all the states of India then followed something similar. And then that's the reason why we got this tremendous upsurge in female and education enrollment, which is a wonderful thing into secondary enrollment. So secondary enrollment jumped from 58% in 2010 to 85% in a matter of 5 years by 2015. Bihar, of course, did extremely well, and it happened with gender parity. Why is this gender parity so important? It's important because at our level of per capita income, gender parity at secondary level is rarely achieved. So it was a remarkable achievement. But if the jobs are not growing, the female LFPR is not going to improve. So we've got a long way to go, clearly, if jobs are not growing. If we were to invest in the school program, the health program, these are the sectors where women actually would get jobs as school teachers, as health workers. Extremely important. There is, of course, a very successful Jivika program, which is the Bihar way of calling what is called the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. It's a relatively successful because as women have fallen out of agriculture, they've gotten engaged in these self-help groups, but they don't necessarily raise incomes to levels which would actually raise them above the poverty line. So we've got really very serious problems ahead. And finally, I'm closing now. There is precious little even thinking. I've talked about the crisis in education, the learning levels I've sort of hinted at. There's no one even thinking in government about vocational education. I mean, vocational education training requires a complete and comprehensive rethink by a joint task force of the Bihar Departments of Labor, Education, and Bihar Skill Development Mission. Of course, first, without improving foundational learning levels of students, any expansion of currently available VET is a waste of scarce government resources. Secondly, we should stop expanding higher education colleges affiliated to universities because all we are doing is producing unemployables. There's growing demand for education, there's no question. And VET, if it was to expand, if it involves employers, it would actually improve quality. So we need to set up a task force to review VET above all. So I'm closing. I want to sort of just begin by saying there's a long way ahead. I think to summarize, I would say we have to get the population growth rate down. For that, you have to invest in the health and education. That will create jobs in government and also, above all, in police. That many other things are required. We can talk about that in the question and answer. But it could getting people into the police and placing them at least in locations where the clusters are to improve the law and order situation there might help to stabilize the governance situation. Might. And finally, of course, doing all the things that I've been talking about in respect of industrial policy for the private sector jobs. Thank you very much for your attention.
Professor Kamar, you have to unmute yourself.
सची भाई आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही थी.
Professor Kamar, you have to unmute yourself.
I can't.
मेरी आवाज आ रही है?
आ रही है. अब now I've got it.
हाँ.
Furqan bhai is saying he's unable to unmute.
No.
Yes. Now you have permitted me to speak and unmuted me. Very, very comprehensive presentation. I think participant would agree with me that each of the slides was a subject matter of 1 hour lecture. So there has been a bit of information overload on each of us. And I think we will take some time to absorb what Santosh Mehrotra has said. I'll reserve my comment to the end, Sachiji, and maybe the floor could be open for question answer.
I think, we will first have the two discussants and then
Oh,
we'll open it.
Yes, very important.
Yeah. So over to Himanshu first.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Himanshu.
So thank you for this interesting platform. And I must say that this is something which has been an excellent tour de force that Santosh has presented. I mean, I think I don't think there is any comprehensive analysis of Bihar's situation as has been presented here, and I think something that should have actually been done in by the Bihar government or from research institutions in Bihar itself. And I think it's a really sad state of affairs that we are still looking for this kind of analytical understanding of what is going wrong with Bihar or what exactly is required to be done in Bihar. But as Professor Khan basically mentioned, I mean, there are too many things. And this is almost like an economic survey. And for that, I think we will need to have a whole Bihar Legislative Assembly session to discuss the various issues related to that. But I think what is, so I will not get into all of this because Professor Bhagat is also there. I'll pick up only on 3 issues. And I think one of the issues that I would at least particularly like to focus on is the issue of jobs. And I think very rightly pointed out by Santosh that given that Bihar has a large percentage of population which is in agriculture and it is largely a rural population, reviving agriculture is something which is essential to any discussion of employment revival in Bihar. And I think Santosh has obviously pointed out to various things that can be done. I think the 2 issues that I would like to highlight, which were not missing, I would not call it as a missing in that sense, but in a sense, need more discussion, are basically the first, in a sense, is the issue of prices in that sense. And I think that is something which is an essential part of it. And Bihar made a mistake, and I think a very, very big mistake, which was basically a mistake that was committed of abolishing the APMC acts. And that has basically led to a situation where there are the whole procurement system has now gone into a system of the PACs of the primary agricultural cooperative societies. But if you look at the kind of procurement of the price support that the Bihar agricultural farmers receive, that is something which is obviously much, much lower, and in fact, almost negligible. I think it's something that needs to be done, and we need to be actually, we should be actually thinking about having some kind of a price support mechanism. Now, that I think is something which requires a detailed analysis. It used to have, and Bihar was picking up before Nitish Kumar finally decided to shut shop and get out of this whole procurement system or the price support mechanism in that sense. Secondly, I think a point that needs to be emphasized is that Bihar is a very flood-prone kind of a state. In the sense, roughly 50% of the area area under cultivation in Bihar is flood-prone. And I think unless we find some kind of a situation of taking care of this situation, it is unlikely that we are going to have a situation of agricultural productivity improving. That requires a collaboration not just with the central government but also with the Nepalese governments from the most of the rivers flow, and they basically inundate or flood the Bihar plains in that sense. And I think that will require a huge investment to be able to do that. So these are the two things which I think will require proper attention, which I thought was something which was should have been, should be given more focus in that sense. I think the two other aspects, which is again related to agriculture, is again, if you look at Santosh has already pointed out the per capita incomes and various other things. But if you look at the productivity levels of agriculture in Bihar in the 60s and 70s, they were actually comparable to most of the states. And in fact, only after the Green Revolution that you see that other states start catching, going forward, where Bihar basically starts stagnating, and actually it has remained at the level that we see currently in. There is a huge regional variation. Obviously, Western Bihar has relatively better agricultural productivity compared to other ones, but it has a fertile area. And I think one needs to basically have a proper cropping pattern analysis, agroclimatic zonal planning. Those are issues which will basically be helpful in improving Bihar's agriculture. That's something which is important. On the issue of manufacturing, I think I'm not so convinced, because the problems are deep-rooted, and these are the problems which are coming with a lot of baggage. And I think where geography becomes important for Bihar is also because it is one of the landlocked states in that sense. And it's something which is where land is also scarce, other than being landlocked. It also has the scarcity of land, which is what most of the industries are currently asking for. And I think in that sense, a large-scale revival of manufacturing may not be the right way of going as far as Bihar's manufacturing revival is concerned. But certainly, small-scale manufacturing is something which will basically be, and particularly those linked to the food processing sector and others, is certainly will be very helpful in at least absorbing some labor out of agricultural sector to the non-agricultural sector. But I think where there is a huge potential that Bihar has is the potential as far as services are concerned. And that is where I think Bihar is fortunate enough to have at least, it used to have, now the situation has worsened over a period of time, is to have a skilled workforce, which a large part of that is migrating, which is now there in Delhi and other places. You'll go anywhere and you'll find Bihar skilled workers working there in different industries. And that is something that can be brought back if the services are given much priority compared to manufacturing. So I think we need to have a clear idea of where exactly the employment generation has to happen. So that's something which I would say that agriculture is something which is paramount. Some part of it is difficult to do, particularly on taking care of the flood situation or, for example, the irrigation potential that exists in the state. But at least on prices, I think this is something which is very easily doable, and it is something which is where Bihar is likely to respond to this incentives if these are available to the farmers in Bihar. The second issue that I wanted to highlight again is, and that is related to the job issue, but also related to the human development aspect that was highlighted. And I think education is something which is where Bihar has actually gone back. There is a huge regression that has happened both in primary education as well as in higher education. And those are the ones where these are the sectors where large potentials exist for absorbing employment. It's not in school teachers, but also generally creating a full ecosystem of educational achievements. And I think once that sets in the process, we will also be also creating a kind of a base for a skill-based services sector, particularly in the IT sector and other sectors, to be able to take care of the need of employment creation. Yeah, that's something which is a constraint, and I think it is something where much more effort, much more investment has to go in than what is currently being seen in Bihar government's approach, or even the resources that are being allocated to the other sectors. I think health is again something which is very important, but I'm not going to, because Professor Bhagat, I'm sure, is likely to touch upon those issues. But I think a point that came out from the entire presentation, but somehow wasn't explicitly mentioned in that sense, is really the failure of governance. And I think it is not just a question of failure of governance that happened with the RJD government in 1990 or the Nitish government coming after 2005. I think it predates that. I think a lot of the indicators that was presented, and these are well known. The slide of Bihar's decline, in a sense, starts somewhere in the late 60s to early 70s onwards, which is where Bihar starts slipping behind compared to other states. And actually, most of the people don't know. And per capita income is one indicator. But even if you look at the poverty indicators, you will be surprised to know that Tamil Nadu was poorer than Bihar in 1960. But today, I mean, by the beginning of the 1990 itself, it basically had become the two of the poorest states. And that happened because of various factors. But I think a large part of that is also the issue of governance, which I think is also a big deterrent for private sector to invest, the big deterrent for the local talent to basically get into all of these issues. And I think the supply side efforts that Santosh has pointed out of providing impetus or stimulus to the small scale and medium enterprises, or for example, the industrial clusters and all of these issues, unlikely these are going to be any use unless the governance structure improves. Now that's a big word, and I don't think I'm going to get into it. And it's also a very difficult word to define in that sense. But somehow I think it is something which has to do with the approach, the linkages between the state and the private sector, the state between the civil society, the state and the political system. And I think all of these, in a sense, require a reset, which is not very easy to achieve. And it's more like we are, in a sense, what we call as a typical kind of economist language that I'm going to use, is that we are in some kind of a low-level equilibrium trap. And it is unless we move out of that low-level equilibrium trap, unless there's something that moves, which basically tries to break that low-level equilibrium, we are unlikely to move forward on any of the fronts. And it's not a chicken and egg story. It's something which is far more serious issue that we need to be thinking about. But I'll simply end by saying that probably this is something which is one of the rare documents that has been prepared by Santosh and his team and his students in that sense. And they have put in a huge amount of effort into providing us a very comprehensive picture of what is the reality or the real situation that is there in Bihar. And I think what this needs to be taken forward. It needs to be discussed more and more, not just in these kind of platforms, but also in the corridors of powers in Bihar, in the policy circles in Bihar, in the bureaucratic setup in Bihar, and the political setup in Bihar. Because I think things have reached a situation where some kind of a action plan, some kind of a strategy needs to be evolved. Otherwise, things are going to slide back further if there is no action taken in that sense. I mean, as of now, I think I'll stop here and let others comment on that.
Thank you very much, Himanshuji, for providing the perspective and the deeper understanding of the data and the analysis that Professor Mehrotra presented. I think we will come back to many of the issues that you have raised. Now we may come to Professor Bhagat.
Thank you, Professor Kamar. Thank you, Professor Sinha, Professor Jai Bhai, inviting me and giving this opportunity. I am also privileged to see several of my colleagues, seniors. I see Professor Surendra Kumar here from Harsidayanand University and who was Director of Green Institute. with whom I have worked for a long time and learned many things. So it's a great opportunity. And I have been listening to Professor Mehrotra and learning from him quite a lot in several occasions. And I'm really amazed to see his work with so huge data, empirical analysis, and also bringing out the policy suggestions what Bihar should do. So in 8 to 9 minutes time, I will say few of the things which like to reinforce what Professor Mehrotra has said, and some of the points I will also add. So let me first begin with some positive side of Bihar. And if you look at some of the positive side, this is enigmatic for demographers and health researchers, that why infant mortality is low in Bihar. And just I was looking at the data, infant mortality of from SRS 29 for Bihar per 1,000 live births, and for India it is 30. And if you see the life expectancy of Bihar and India, it's almost equal, 70 years. So population growth, issue of population growth, of course, fertility is one of the important issue. Fertility need to be reduced, but reduction of fertility will not guarantee that population growth will not take place, because population growth also takes place with rising longevity, life expectancy, etc. And there is a age structural issue. So those are I think, positive side of human well-being. So this is one thing. Then we see always it's important to remember the Bihar's history, that the ancient republic where Vaisali was there, Lichvis and Briji republic was there, and then we have several centuries. I think the Magad Empire was a empire, and it has a very golden history. And Mahatma Gandhi started non-cooperation movement from Motihari. And we have an enlightened place called Bodh Gaya. So all these things are there, but what is happening? How come the Bihar, which was having a almost not so lagging position, it has come down? And when we look at history, I think scholars trace that, of course, permanent zamindari system, 1793 was something that was a type of a spot, we can say, that was responsible for zamindari system and bringing many of the evils. And at the same time, Calcutta, metropolitan city of Calcutta, was rising, and Bihar served as a hinterland of providing coolie migration. So from coolie migration to indentured migration, and then something happened from 1990s, that is the labor migration has happened, and huge labor migration. So as you know, Bihar is known for three most important things. One is the migration, labor migration, and it is long-term, temporary, circular migration. It is not a permanent migration. I also come from erstwhile Bihar. I'm also migrant. But then we are included in the urban citizenship, urban system. But this type of migration that is taking place from Bihar is something we put under the rubric of long-term, temporary, circular migration, where the family is left behind. And then there is a seasonal migration also, but that is a very small proportion of whole migration happening, where the scheduled tribes, scheduled caste people are migrating for construction worker and other things. So those, I think, migration uh, and uh, uh, and second is the flood. Of course, Himanshu has already pointed out about the flood. But then, and third thing is the caste, and it's more of not only in a negative sense, but also in a positive sense of social justice. But then when we look at Bihar's strategy of development and flood and all these issues, related issues, we need to make a distinction between North Bihar and South Bihar. South Bihar is by and large flood free. And some of the largest cities, three largest cities of Bihar are located in the southern Bihar. That is Patna, Gaya, and Bhagalpur. So these two distinctions, that what is happening as a part of the special strategy. So what Professor Mehrotra has said, I'm just bringing some of the things from geographical spatial perspective. And then there are two largest cities in the North Bihar, that is Darbhanga and Muzaffar. And we have the Simanchal, that is Katihar, Purnia, Araria, Kishanganj, most backward. If you look at the literacy rate of this area, you find huge difference. So Bihar is not something homogeneous. It has regional disparity within that. So we need to recognize this, and then the spatial, the cluster strategy that Professor Mehrotra has suggested, the industrial cluster strategy. I would like to add to it and expand a little bit that whenever we are talking about clusters, it needs to be rooted in space and place. Space and place is very important, and space and place where we look at the level of urbanization, strategy of urbanization. So Bihar, of course, Professor Mehrotra has already said 10% level of urbanization, and that also shows the disparity between Bihar and other states. If you take the highest level of urbanization in the states of India, that is Goa, and compare the income level of Goa and Bihar, it's widening. And many of the states, regional disparity or interstate disparity in income level is widening. And you will be surprised to see the data that the Goa's income is 10 times higher than Bihar's income. And this has been widening for several states. So urbanization is very important, and we need to see how urbanization, of course, is having a low level, but how Bihar is urbanizing and what are the cities level, city hierarchy is there. Professor Mehrotra highlighted this thing, that yes, Patna, importance of Patna. Patna has a very high level of primacy in Bihar. But then what is happening to the second largest city? Second largest city is Gaya. And Gaya is 5 times smaller than Patna. So this is happening within Bihar. And it is not happening within Bihar, it is happening all over India. And so in Eastern India, Calcutta is the largest city. And Patna is the second largest city in Eastern India. And Patna is 7 times smaller than Calcutta. But this thing is not happening in Western India. We have in Mumbai, we have Pune, we have so many cities are there, and so similar things are happening in North and South. So how regional disparity is rooted in the process of urbanization and cities becoming actually the engines of growth in this market-driven economy when we want to increase the GDP. So this grounding or this cluster approach, that is very important to increase the non-farm jobs. Actually, without increasing non-farm jobs, there is hardly any solution. How much agriculture can sustain? Agricultural production increasing doesn't mean that agricultural prices will be rising. And there are weather shocks and etc. So what today farmers need, that their sons and daughters should get non-farm jobs. And how these non-farm jobs could be there, either it should be from industrialization or from service sector. And these two, of course, cluster approach need to be rooted in space and place. And in that respect, I will propose that there should be 3 levels of clustering. One is that at a large city level, and at large city level, we have 5 cities, Patna, Gaya, Bhagalpur, Darbhanga, and Muzaffarpur. There should be some sort of connectivity among this city, because city provides agglomeration economy. Without agglomeration economy, you can't have the cluster. So agglomeration economy provides some sort of connectivity on all transportation, banking, educational, all what Professor Mehrotra said. Just I am trying to putting things, bringing a geographer's perspective, how this can unfold over space and place. Second is that we have small and medium towns, which may be less than 1 lakh population, and where the concept of Pura is very important, providing urban amenities to the rural area. And a very fantastic book has been written by our ex-president, Abdul Kalam, and that is targeting 3 billion population. And the Pura approach is basically creating a cluster. And he proposed that India should be divided into 7,000 puras. We may have desert pura, we may have coastal pura, we may have mountain pura, depending upon the opportunity of agro processing. Bihar is known for lychee. Bihar is known for makhana. Bihar is known for sattu, and so many khaja. Who knows khaja outside Bihar? I think I have been brought up and educated in Bihar, erstwhile Bihar. Now I come from Jharkhand. So that's how we knew about all these things. But these things have disappeared. That's what Professor Mehrotra has said. So marketing of khaja, marketing of sattu, marketing of makhana, marketing of lychee, and of course, variety of mangoes also are there. So, and these needs actually the marketing. If you go to the city, any city of Bihar, marketing facility, vegetable market, horrible. If you enter into the small town, big town of the city, and you see the fish market, you see the vegetable market, you see the grain market. If cities doesn't provide market facility, how the rural area can grow, how the agriculture can. So these are actually the issue of urban planning and also the urban development strategy. So second proposal, I like to propose that Pura model should be followed at the small and medium town level, where cluster of villages should also be integrated with various types of connectivity. Transport connectivity is most important, and then we have other, even internet connectivity and other connectivity. Lastly, we have in Bihar, in the last census shows, there are 55 census towns. These are the villages, potential villages, which has capacity to urbanize. Where are these villages? Can anybody see it? Sometimes politicians say, I am going to adopt this village or that village. Adopting village may not solve the problem, but the cluster approach that is bringing into the Pura model. And lastly, I think, let me say that two more points I'll say. Second last is that in this country, we don't have urbanization policy. And I'm saying with some work, we have urban development policy. We don't have urbanization policy. Urbanization policy means how urbanization can become instrument of rural development, integrating rural and urban areas, bridging the divide between urban and rural. And Pura is the model. Pura is the model. We have now something is there, which nobody know. Everybody, most of the people don't know. That is Syama Prasad Mukherjee Urban Mission. It's still there. But then this program, Urban Mission, is something which is sectoral program. It doesn't have a space-place approach that integrates and provides connectivity and which can lead to agglomeration economy. So how to generate agglomeration economy so that non-farm jobs can be produced, skill development and other cost-saving mechanism can be enhanced. So that is about the agglomeration economy. The last point that I would like to say about the higher education, and this is where I like to slightly differ with Professor Mehrotra. Higher education again provides some sort of agglomeration economy. If you see education as a pyramid, and having educated from Bihar, both school level and higher educational level, then I went to JNU. I have seen that how in 70s and 80s, Bihar was vibrant in higher education. Patna University, Bhagalpur University, so many universities were so vibrant, and schools were there. The school where I study, the school principal used to call us when there was metric examination at 5 o'clock and teaching English language. And then that was the English language I am using now. So you can imagine that what was 70s and 80s Bihar and how this higher education has collapsed. And higher education, I feel health, after health, higher education, including all sorts of education, but not that the higher education creates unemployment. It's about social transformation. That is how I'd like to stop here. Thank you very much.
Furkan Sahab, you have to unmute yourself.
Furkan bhai, just wanted to flag that unfortunately at 5 I will have to leave. I have another program at 5 I have to join. online.
Oh,
Don't worry, we'll not hold you until 5.
And I'm happy to be
But
here with
The,
you.
the best that
Yeah.
the best I
You
can
know-
do is that I can restrict my comment only to 5 minutes at the
yeah.
end. So I think Sachiji, you could then coordinate the question answer session.
No, I don't think if there are many questions which have come. I think everybody is very happy listening to 3 different. I think, of course, Professor Santosh Malhotra's presentation was excellent, and what value that Himanshu and Professor Bhagat has brought in. Each one of these, and I'm really happy as a geographer that Professor Bhagat brought in the spatial dimension, which Santosh was also trying to look at when he presented the maps. So, there is 1 or 2 observations perhaps, that I can see why we are seeing reverse migration in Bihar when most of the push factors are compelling youth to get unorganized work in other southern states. This is one question from Milind Shekhar Anand.
That's right.
And then there is another one. So is somebody like to comment? Santosh, would you like to comment?
Yeah, let
Yeah.
me do that. Let me do that.
Yeah.
First, of course, I want to very much thank both Himanshu and Professor Bhagat for very useful comments, and I'm going to be, of course, taking these into account as we begin to prepare the book. I will have something to say about what both of them said, but let me answer the question: why are we seeing reverse migration? So we are seeing reverse migration across the whole country. Please remember that there are 7 or 8 states which are sending states, which are source states for migration. And the southern and western states are the destination states. And the reverse migration took place, of course, in the first instance on account of a very poorly designed and implemented response to COVID. March 25th, national lockdown at 4 hours notice. China didn't have a national lockdown, 1. 2, no country in the world had as strict a lockdown as we did. I mean, we brought the entire nation to a standstill. But the problem is that our second wave was very, very virulent. It killed hundreds of thousands. It finally killed 4.5 million, according to a series of studies, not the 4.5 lakhs that the government claimed. And people wanted to be home. This reverse migration, I can assure you, continues into 22 and even early 23. Some workers came back. It's not that all that workers weren't coming back. Some workers came back. But the point is, this is happening because non-farm jobs are not growing across the country. I could demonstrate this, but in the interest of time, I won't. I mean, if you just have to Google me, you'll find a lot of work that I've done in this regard. What are the problems? The government keeps putting out a narrative that, oh, jobs are growing, but actually they're not. And that's the reason why we are not seeing a decline in the share of agriculture and the absolute number of workers in agriculture. I mean, I was in a state of shock when we analyzed the PLFS data for 22-23, and we said, oh my God, we are seeing even in 22-23 an increase in agriculture in Bihar and in UP and Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, the usual sending states. So yes, I mean, this is what I was trying to say, that jobs were growing at a rate of 7.5 million per annum between 2004 and 12. The employment data shows that, because we were growing at 8% per annum. And since then, until 2017, after that, on account of a series of policy mistakes, the number of jobs that were being created in the non-farm sector. Please remember that across Bihar and across the whole country, young people have gotten better educated, including girls, and I said that. And obviously, they would not want to be in agriculture. People want to be in non-farm work. And if the jobs are not growing, what will they do? They'll join agriculture. Women have rejoined agriculture. They become unpaid family labor and doing Manrega work. So this is the reason. So let me be brief. So let me allow other people to say something. So before in closing, just say a few words about Professors Bhagat and Himanshu.
Yeah, there are a few more questions before we move on to others. But this is, I don't know who would answer, but then what about mass consciousness and the awareness, which is perhaps completely lacking? I don't think, Professor Malhotra or anybody talked about it, but then this is an important point. Let me read the question fully. Uh, I have my cursor. Yes. What about the mass consciousness and awareness, which perhaps is completely lacking? Unless the public doesn't demand it, politicians won't provide it. There is an apathy of services, but still it isn't in political discourse during the election time. Well, this is an observation, and we all can only agree with this. And this is a much larger question, so which we were not looking at in this presentation, but we'll certainly look into that maybe very soon. We'll have somebody talking about it. Gulnaz says the country's welfare, future welfare in terms of a productive population is heavily dependent on states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, traditionally considered as lagging behind. However, the generation that will constitute the workforce 20 to 30 years from now is already born. There is an urgent need to reform education and other associated sectors in the states. Otherwise, otherwise the nation will bear a significant burden in the coming future with a TFR of other states already below replacement levels. The dependency ratio is expected to invert, resulting in larger elderly population to care for. However, it is apparent that from this discussion that at least Bihar is not undertaking the necessary measures. And so this is just an observation. Yes, it adds value to whatever that was presented here. I think, Narendra Kumar says the presentation has given much attention to small sector industries. I want to ask why, even after so much positive image built up in the national and international media, large corporate houses have shied away from investing in the state. Is that what perhaps is the question?
Let me address this, because in a sense,
Yeah.
Himanshu brought this up, and I think it's a very important issue.
Yeah.
Himanshu is absolutely spot on when he says the heart of the problem is governance. Now, I sort of deliberately avoided talking about it. We do talk about it, but when we convert this into a book, we will be talking about it. Big industry. I don't expect big industry like Himanshu does not. Himanshu is absolutely spot on. Big industry needs land. This is a state which is extremely dense. It is far denser, probably 3 times denser than Kerala is. So I am honestly not even expecting in the first round big industry coming. However, the bottom line is that what we've seen is deindustrialization. And we've seen deindustrialization precisely because of the governance problem. And this, I have to say that I see a ray of hope in what Tejasvi is attempting to do in hiring teachers, hiring policemen. But the problem is much deeper, I think, as Himanshu was rightly saying, and in the book, I'm going to deal with this. I haven't dealt with this because this was more a policy-oriented document. And I would go even further than what Himanshu was saying. You see, here the nature of the subaltern social movements of the lower castes in both UP and Bihar have been somewhat similar. And they've been very dissimilar from the subaltern social movements, pre-independence in Tamil Nadu and in Kerala and in Maharashtra, now Maharashtra, Phule, Savitribai, and so on, where the subaltern movements resulted in, I mean, I'm summarizing, I have a longer argument about this in a separate paper. The subaltern movements in the South fructified in real changes in social policy. There's a whole dynamic to this, which I don't have the time to go into. We have too little time. But the point—
Yeah, there is another book by Prerna has also talked about it.
I know, Prerna's book,
Solidarity. Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, but Prerna's book doesn't even actually
Yeah, it
understand.
doesn't deal with your question. Yeah, that I
Doesn't understand the issue. I actually deal with Prerna's. But I just want to say that it will shock you to know that not just deindustrialization has been taking place in Bihar. I have learned that it's not just that the credit deposit ratio in Bihar is about 32%, meaning all the Biharis who are putting their money into the bank accounts there, that money is not being reinvested in Bihar, it's going out. In India, the credit deposit ratio is relatively low at 52%, but the point is in Bihar, it's even lower at 30%. And what's interesting is that where the money is being made in the construction sector, the money, when it's being made, it is getting transferred to UP. More investment, Bihari, Jharkhand industrialists or construction developers, they're taking the money to UP and investing in, sort of development activity there. Now, Himanshu is absolutely right. This needs to be heard in the corridors of power, what we are trying to say. I did hand over a copy of the report to the industry minister, but now you know what has happened, how tables have been turned. So we've got the same dispensation in power, which has been in power for the last 17 of the 20 years, with two intermittent intervals of the RJD participation. So I'm obviously losing hope, because in this scenario, no one seems to have the 20-year regime has not delivered anything. Literally not delivered anything. And Tejasvi, maybe because he's a young man, maybe because he's understood that he's given a promise of jobs, so he's had to start appointing people in schools and in the police, but not happening in the health sector. So what am I to say? I am not very hopeful. I agree with Professor Bhagat broadly. On his rather interesting and intriguing question about, IMR and Bihar being 29, India being at 30, that remains a puzzle. I would take you back, sir, where I don't have to tell you this, but perhaps the rest of our audience may be interested. Probably the private sector providers in health have spread their roots deep across Bihar, and they're saving lives. The malnutrition levels are extremely high, but they're still saving babies' lives so that they prevent it from dying. So what we have is a Ramalinga Swami, I think, argument dating back to 1995, which essentially is saying, we will have very poor levels of nutrition, but we might be able to continue to save lives. Final point, very quickly, mid-size and small-size towns. Just want to make a larger point here. Absolutely spot on, Professor Bhagat. Contrast with China is absolutely critical and goes to the heart of the matter. What is the contrast with China? Half of India's urban population is in tiny towns. In the interest of time, I won't define. While half of China's urban population is in mid-sized towns. This is important because clearly, if you have a very large number of tiny towns, it's difficult for a poor country and a poorer state to actually invest and create infrastructure and bring about the agglomeration economies that you would like to see happen. The Chinese economy has managed to do that in mid-sized towns because they took a planning approach. You're absolutely right, sir. We don't have a planning approach. And this great government of ours currently in power has, of course, done away with the one institution in the country which used to do some planning. And Bihar, I don't believe, has a very functional planning board, unlike Kerala.
Yeah. Before you go, Santosh, there is one last, anybody can perhaps answer, maybe including the chair. Bihar government has declared 103 statutory towns in 2020 to spur investment. The latest economic survey says economic shows urbanization percentage to 15%
Sure.
percent in small towns. Having economy of large village as people engage in agriculture sector will help spur urban growth. Will it help spur urban growth? I mean, that's the point. This is the last question that we are taking because of lack of time. Please leave your questions in the chat box. We'll forward it to our experts here, and we'll certainly get back to you.
Yeah, I think Professor Kamar should be given a chance.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Professor Mehrotra. I think you can snatch a few minutes from your next assignment to be here. I think
Sure.
now was the time when people were raising hands, and I feel sorry that we are not able to provide them time. I mean, indeed, it was a very, very informative, thought-provoking presentation that you made, and the two discussants provided the perspective, which helped you understand your data far better. There were a couple of things that came to my mind, which I would want to put before the speaker. In one of your slides, you mentioned that agriculture sector employments are increasing, both in absolute number as well as percentages, but the same slide also informed me that the services, construction, and manufacturing were also employing more people. So they were all growing, or at least they were not declining. It means the more people that are being added to labor force, I think they are not getting increasingly employed in the manufacturing sector or in the services sector, and therefore they are staying back in the agriculture sector. So that is one. Second thing is that you said that population growth is the reason for the low income. But I think somebody could also argue that population and income, there is a correlation, education, income, population. But which is the cause and which is the effect, I think we are still not very sure. So if the income level rises, if education level rises, people become wiser and they produce less babies and population growth declines. And that has happened. So level of development, economic development has something to do. So whether you would want to control population, I think the only example that we have is that of China and a few other very small countries. So I'm not very sure that that could be the basis, but I don't think that that was your primary focus. Of course, nobody can argue otherwise that human resource development, human development is critical for the development of any geography or any state. Now, I think I would want to conclude, considering the considering the constraint of time that you have put, and I think that is where I would like to say what Professor Bhagat was saying. You see, higher education is a kind of aspiration for the people. We have been popularizing skills. We have been popularizing vocational jobs at the national level, also at the state level. I'm not very sure what initiatives have been taken specifically in Bihar, but at the national level, there have been many initiatives. But somehow, over the past 3 decades, and even the most recent initiatives of skill development did not pick up. Somehow, people's aspiration is white-collar jobs, not the blue-collar jobs. So that is a kind of mindset that people have. Even if the blue-collar jobs provides more income than the white-collar job, people are still looking for white-collar job. So how to break that? So merely by providing more opportunity of skills or more opportunity for vocationalization would not make people come to that. But as you said, as Professor Bhagat said, that higher education is in fact also an instrument of social transformation. So that is one aspiration that people have. So let us not take that away from people, at least from the people of Bihar. So let them pursue. Finally, I would like to say that there are a few things I think when we are studying Bihar, so failure of the Bihar to capitalize on its potential and possibilities has also led to successes of many states. So if in Bihar the gross enrollment ratio is low, because the gross enrollment ratio you calculate by taking the enrollment in that state divided by the population in the relevant age group, that works out to be lower. And if in Karnataka it is far higher, but we know that if 10% of the students in Karnataka are from Bihar, so the loss of Bihar is the gain of Karnataka in the gross enrollment ratio. But in any case, it is the people of Bihar which are getting higher education. It means if you deprive them the higher educational opportunities within the state, people would migrate for higher education abroad, and that will again become uh, like more favorable to the rich and the elites rather than to the masses and to the poor. And therefore, I would argue for a higher education. I think I don't know whether you are sharing your presentations and slides with the organizers. If you do, I think we need to go through them in detail, because particularly I'm finding that there is so many information that we need to reflect on them. We need to understand them, but if they are available to us. So thank you very much for enlightening us. We knew many things about Bihar, but your numbers made us more scary. So you, in fact, accentuated and highlighted all of the problem. I'm not bringing in the political issues or political economy issues. I'm purely seeing it as a number from the managerial point of view. So with this, I'll say thank you very much. Over to you, Sachiji. Whatever.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Kamar. And thank you, Santosh. Thank you, Bhagat. Thank you, Himanshu, for making this afternoon a very, very informative afternoon for all of us. And many questions would perhaps remain with us to ponder over. Santosh has already shared his report that he submitted with the government to us. I mean, since he's going to work on towards the book, I think it would be we can wait until the book comes out, or maybe it's too late to wait because Bihar cannot wait. If that is the case, then Santosh can authorize me to share his report with some of our friends, and with as many people they could perhaps put in their minds. The idea is to talk about Bihar and do something about Bihar, and to perhaps no matter which is the government, and this is only a kind of a seasonal migration of governments from this side to that side. We have had occasions in 60s and 70s where there were overnight governments. So in Bihar. So and these are huge challenges. So we'll certainly take them up. I think it's time. Will not hold you back, Santosh, because you have to go for yet another meeting. I know you are a very busy person, particularly these days. Just now that the I mean, you had the budget presentation, so many people would be trying to understand things. I'll now request Dr. Madan Ray to propose a vote of thanks. We have had good presentation. We couldn't really offer everybody an opportunity to raise questions. Maybe some of these questions would come in yet another session, maybe sometimes from now. Thank you, Madan. Can you please come in and propose a vote of thanks?
ओके बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। मेरा वीडियो आप ही की तरफ से ऑफ है शायद।
अच्छा, वो पता नहीं
होस्ट की
क्यों
तरफ
ऑफ हो
से
गया।
बता रहा है।
आपकी आवाज बुलंद है।
कोई नहीं
आप।
है।
जी जी।
हाँ कोई नहीं। हाँ ये इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ जोग्राफर्स प्रोफेसर एजाजुद्दीन अहमद मेमोरियल फंड और सोशल जियोग्राफी और पाटलिपुत्र इंटरनेशनल इंटेलिजेंसिया फोरम की ओर से बैठक के अध्यक्ष प्रोफेसर फुरकान कमर जी, प्रोफेसर संतोष मेहरोत्रा जी, प्रोफेसर आर जय भाई जी और डॉक्टर हिमांशु, प्रोफेसर आर बी भगत को हम बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद अपनी तरफ से देते हैं, और साथ में अपने फोरम की तरफ से भी सच्चिदानंद सिन्हा ने हमारे इस फोरम को जीवंत और जागरूक बना दिया है। और प्रोफेसर संतोष मेहरोत्रा ने जो हमें बिहार के बारे में ऐसी मतलब बिल्कुल ताज़ा तरीन डेटा के साथ जो एक झकझोर देने वाली जो हमें पूरा का पूरा एक अपनी दृष्टि दी है, और जिस पर हम सोचने और बहुत कुछ समझने को बाध्य हो गए हैं। तो आशा है कि इस तरह के डिस्कशंस आगे भी आप जारी रखेंगे। तो बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और हमारे इस जो पाटलिपुत्र फोरम के महासचिव भी हैं सच्चिदानंद सिन्हा जी, और साथ में कहना चाहूँगा मैं कि हमारे जो साथी जो जुड़े हुए हैं फोरम के, उनको, और यह बहुत ही बौद्धिक लोगों की और बहुत कहना चाहिए कि तो अद्भुत किस्म की बैठक हो गई, जहां इतने विद्वानों को आपने इस प्लेटफॉर्म पर ले आए। और हम लोग एक्शन जैसे एनजीओ के थ्रू, हम अभी अनिल कुमार सिंह को याद करते हैं जिन्होंने इस फोरम की स्थापना की थी, और असली हमारा मकसद यही है, और वो काम पूरे अध्ययन से ही शुरू होता है। और प्रोफेसर संतोष मेहरोत्रा जी और उनकी टीम ने जो अद्भुत काम किया है, इसके लिए हम बिहार फोरम की तरफ से, अपनी तरफ से एक ये आंख खोलने वाली जो रिपोर्ट है, इस पर आगे हम लोग कार्रवाई करने के लिए अलग से भी विचार करेंगे अपने फोरम की तरफ से भी। और मेरे ख्याल से देश में यह जो बिहार के विकास की जो बात है, वह केवल राज्य तक सीमित नहीं है, वो केंद्र की भी उतनी ही भूमिका उसमें होती है, और अन्य राज्यों के साथ, जैसा कि आप देश के पूरे माहौल में देख रहे हैं कि नॉर्थ और साउथ का एक तरह का विभाजन जैसा चल रहा है, उस स्थिति में हम कर्नाटका और अन्य जगहों से जो तुलना कर रहे हैं, तो जरूर हमें अपने इस पर ध्यान देना चाहिए कि हमारे जो पोटेंशियल्स हैं, जिस हम अभी हमारे एक वक्ता ने, मेरे ख्याल से भगत जी ने, जो कि बिहार की जो ऐतिहासिक और सांस्कृतिक धरोहर रही है, हमारा जो हमारी पहुंच रही है, उसकी तरफ हम लेके जाएं और बिहार को आगे बढ़ाएं। और ये जैसे उन्होंने अभी एक जोग्राफर और इकोनॉमिस्ट के दृष्टि से आपने कहा कि हमें रोजगार सृजन करना चाहिए, तो लेकिन हम उलझे हुए हैं न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी पर, जिस पर बहुत सारा काम किया है सच्चिदानंद सिन्हा ने, और सेमिनार भी। तो हम रियल इशू से राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर भी ध्यान दिलाना होगा कि अगर बिहार बढ़ेगा तभी देश बढ़ेगा। तो इसको ध्यान में रखते हुए आप लोगों को बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, और हमारे तहे दिल से हम आभार व्यक्त करते हैं कमर साहब का, संतोष मेहरोत्रा जी का, प्रोफेसर जय भाई जी का, हिमांशु जी का, भगत जी का, और अपने मित्रों का धन्यवाद बहुत बहुत।
काफी सारे मित्र, सुरेंद्र जी जुड़े रहे लगातार, बाल मुकुंद जी, तमाम सारे लोग, मैं मौका नहीं दे पाया। 2 घंटा काफी वक्त होता है। मेरे ख्याल से अब संतोष जी को भी हम इजाजत दें। शुक्रिया संतोष भाई, बहुत बहुत
बहुत
शुक्रिया।
बहुत धन्यवाद सचिव
जी
भाई।
जी
मैं मतलब मदन भाई को से माफी मांगना चाहता हूँ। आपने मुझे याद दिलाया था कि मुझे हिंदी में भी कुछ सारांश में अपना वक्तव्य देना चाहिए था, मगर मैं बिल्कुल भूल गया।
कोई
गलती
बात नहीं। आप ल्यूसिड, यू
नहीं,
कुड
वो इसलिए भी जरूरी है कि जिस क्षेत्र में भाषा में, तो थोड़ा सा कॉमन मैन तक पहुंचने के लिए आपने जो काम किया है, वो अपनी भाषा में भी पहुंचनी चाहिए,
मदन
और
भाई,
आगे पहुंचेगा भी, मुझे
मैं आपको
इन्होंने,
लगता है।
इनका जो
संतुष्ट कराना
पहला
चाहता हूँ।
जो
हाँ,
प्रेजेंटेशन था वो बिहार में ही था और हिंदी में था,
तो
और
सारे
इसको प्रेस ने काफी अच्छी तरह से
जी जी
कवर भी किया। मैं चाहूंगा
जी
कि
जी
कभी अलग से बैठ के संतोष भाई से इसको मैं थोड़ा सा उनसे हिंदी में ही लिखवाऊं, और लोगों तक पहुंचाऊं। जी
हाँ, और जमीनी स्तर पर हो जाएगा, क्योंकि
नहीं, उसका
एकेडमिक
समरी
नहीं तो प्योर
समरी
कई
तो
बार
है।
अंग्रेजी सुनते हुए हमें लगता है कि प्योर
नहीं
हाँ
मदन
जी
भाई,
जी,
सर वो हिंदी,
ठीक है,
उसका
बहुत
जो
बढ़िया।
समरी है वो हिंदी में है, मगर
हाँ
वो, पूरा ही करना
जी
होगा।
जी जी जी
मगर
जी।
मैं फिर भी आपसे माफी मांगना चाहता हूँ। मैं
जी
हिंदी भाषी हूँ और मुझे बड़ा आनंद आता
नहीं
है
नहीं
बोलने में, और मुझे दुख हुआ कि मतलब मैं अपना
जी
हिंदी
जी
में अपना उत्तर नहीं दे।
नहीं नहीं,
संतोष जी,
हम लोग आगे बातचीत करते रहेंगे, और विशेष रूप से आपका जो आप आगे भी कष्ट देंगे आप लोगों को। बहुत
और
बहुत धन्यवाद आप लोग।
अब यहीं पे इस सत्र को खत्म करते हैं, और मेरे ख्याल से राजेंद्र जय भाई का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, ध्यान कौर जी आपका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। आप लोग सभी हमारे हौसला बढ़ाने के लिए, पंजाब का जुड़ना बहुत जरूरी है बिहार के लिए भी। तो
वो तो
हम
हमारे लिए
सब
भी उतना ही जरूरी है सर। बिहार इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर अस।
तो ये सिलसिला
डू
ये चले।
एनीथिंग विदाउट बिहार।
सर यूपी भी जुड़ा हुआ है सर, उत्तर
हाँ हाँ,
प्रदेश भी
यूपी
जुड़ा हुआ
बिल्कुल जुड़ा हुआ है। हम आपको देखिए, बिहार से पंजाब बिना यूपी के हम पहुंच
ना
नहीं
जी ना,
सकते, और
हम
बिहारियों की
बिल्कुल
ताकत होती नहीं है कि उड़ के आए,
नहीं
हमको
जी,
तो चल
हम
के ही आना
बिल्कुल
पड़ता है। तो
इंटरडिपेंडेंट एंड स्ट्रांगली।
है।
और
लेकिन सर आपसे रिक्वेस्ट है कि ये सिलसिला जारी रहना चाहिए।
नहीं
आज
नहीं
हाँ जी,
बहुत
हाँ
हम
बिल्कुल।
लोग
जी।
और
लाभान्वित हुए हैं।
सबसे बड़ी बात यह है कि फरखान साहब